Alice laughed. "There's no use trying," she said. "One can't believe impossible things." "I dare say you haven't had much practice," said the White Queen. "Why, when I was your age, I always did it for half an hour a day. Why, sometimes I believed as many as 6 impossible things before breakfast." Through the Looking Glass by Lewis Carroll. We Unitarian Universalists can often have a hard time believing impossible things. We tend to focus on the physical world, and we want rational explanations. Yet it's worth keeping in mind that one of the greatest scientists of all time, Albert Einstein, said imagination is more important than knowledge. Have you ever had times in your life when your imagination ran wild? Have you ever allowed yourself to imagine being a princess or a superhero? What would it be like to live in foreign lands, or like the White Queen, to inhabit strange worlds? Have you ever pictured yourself taking on different roles? Maybe as a child, you practiced what it would feel like to be an adult, or as an adult, imagined a different life altogether. I certainly did. As a child, my many roles included a mermaid, a cowgirl, and a trapeze artist. It's well known that imaginative play is important for children, but it's also important for adults. Our imaginations help us solve big problems. Visualizing things in our mind also gives us practice for physical feats. For example, when recovering from an injury and learning to walk again, or for a gymnast struggling to stay on a balance beam, or for a picture working to perfect her curveball. Our imaginations can take us to wonderful places, but they can also take us to dreadful ones. When we imagine the worst, it can paralyze us. As powerful as imagination is, we have to be careful about how we use it. But what a dull world it would be to be without imagination. No art, no science, poetry, songs, stories, music, no progress or development. Just imagine we would still be in caves during the Stone Age. Our imagination allow us to be compassionate, using empathy as we feel the pain and the joy of others. We can reach out to people close to us and to those literally around the world. How are you using this amazing capacity? I wonder what would happen if, like the White Queen, we made a practice of using our imaginations for half an hour every day. How many impossible things have you believed today? Even if you don't feel like you have much of an imagination, maybe you don't do art or science, the poet and philosopher John O'Donohue would beg to differ. He says we are all imaginative, and his evidence is that we were all once children, and also that we dream every night. As children, we were told that there was a monster under our beds, or that bad things happened beyond the limits of that our parents set for us. We'd inevitably imagine all sorts of terrible creatures lurking just beyond the safety of our adult-imposed boundaries. Perhaps you made up all kinds of stories about those things. And then there are our dreams. Aren't they the moving pictures, ones written, produced, and directed by our subconscious? We don't outgrow the act of dreaming. Dreams are an ongoing source of creative exploration of our interior lives. So imagination is always with us. In fact, imagination is our birthright. As Einstein said, imagination is more important than knowledge. He wasn't saying that knowledge is insignificant, but our current knowledge is, by definition, limited to what we already know. Imagination takes us beyond that. It is the driving force behind innovation, exploration, and the creation of new ideas. It takes us to where no one has gone before, to ideas and concepts that haven't yet been proven or understood. Einstein's imagination and the resulting discoveries took us well beyond the then current knowledge and understanding of physics, actually the entire universe. And more than a century later, we're still working out all of his thoughts. Gravitational waves, unification of gravity and electromagnetism. Don't ask me what those things are. Our imagination gives us the ability to create. In fact, it fuels creativity. Through it, we can envision possibilities and explore concepts and ideas beyond our current reality. It gives us the power to solve tough problems. It even shapes our beliefs and expectations. Imagination is the bridge between what is and what could be. And that's powerful. Imagination is, of course, important for art, science, and technology. It can help heal us individually and as a community. It can give us a connection to our spiritual lives, and it can also just be fun. Here's a healing story. Mukunda Angulo is a young man whose controlling father would never let him leave his home for any reason alone. He and his 6 brothers and 1 sister were homeschooled. The children and mother were in the tight grip of the father, isolated from their peers and normal social interactions. The one thing that they were allowed to do was to watch movies. Mukunda says he learned how to speak and how to dress from watching movies. He learned what the natural world looked like through movies. Because the children didn't have other people to interact with, they used their imaginations. They watched movies over and over and over again, even writing down the dialogue so that they could act out the performance of the movie for themselves. They built sets and created elaborate costumes from things found around the house, like cereal boxes and cardboard. This was their lives. The only holiday they ever celebrated was Halloween, and it was Mukunda's favorite. They made fantastic costumes, hung skeletons, made jack-o'-lanterns out of basketballs. Mukunda and his brother created a whole Halloween city in their apartment. He describes it as his masterpiece. One Halloween, their father forbade them from celebrating. Mukunda was devastated. It was his father taking away the only power that Mukunda had over his life, the power of his imagination. At age 15, Mukunda decided that he could live like that no more. The amazing story of his life unfolded from that moment, a story full of determination and serendipity. Mukunda went on to become a filmmaker, Crystal Moselle created a prize-winning documentary, The Wolf Pack. It was a story about Mukunda and his brothers and how the power of imagination set them free. Theaster Gates is a potter by trade, and he talks about our ability to shape things through creativity. He wasn't making much money throwing pots, but he managed to buy a home. Not too long after the 2008 housing crisis happened, people didn't know what to do with all the abandoned buildings in his Black Chicago neighborhood. The house beside his, a former crack house, was deserted and boarded up. He bought it for $18,000 and slowly began some renovations. Having run out of money, he decided to open up the front of the house and turn it into performance space and a place to hold community dinners. The building ultimately became what is known as the Archive House, which now holds 14,000 books he'd gotten from a closed bookshop. It also serves as a Black cinema that shows films of interest to the people of that community. This was such a success that in another building, he created a listening house filled with 8,000 vinyl records from the closing of a neighborhood record store. Gates sees a direct relationship between his history working with clay, saying that his efforts are slowly starting to reshape how people imagine the south side of that city. He then started the Rebuild Foundation, a nonprofit focused on cultural-driven redevelopment in under-resourced communities, in this case, Black culture. One memorable exhibition was called In Case of Race Riot, Break the Glass, which Gates created using repurposed fire hoses from the South. This, of course, refers to the fire hoses to attack people during the civil rights movement. Perhaps the foundation's most impressive renovation has been that of the crumbling Stony Island Savings Bank that was slated for demolition. It's now a center for exhibitions, musical performances, and archives, especially of Black history of the people of Chicago. He says it's not really about the material that we're working with. It's about our capacity to shape things. He began with very little, but the power of Gates' imagination, vision, actions, and community connections has transformed the neighborhood. Gates' expansive vision includes connecting these multiple community hubs with green space and building a mini Versailles right there on the south side of Chicago. He's already advising people who are developing similar projects in other cities around the country. He advises us to start with where we are, start with what's right in front of us, and then use our imaginations and community connections and see what can happen. You know, I find it curious that these wondrous and amazing things are going on, and yet somehow they manage to operate below our national and cultural radar. And I wonder why that is. Could it be that, as Dr. Ruha Benjamin says, our imaginations have been colonized? That the only stories the news media can imagine telling about places like Chicago's South and West Sides are tales of violence and declining neighborhoods? Dr. Benjamin is a sociologist, scholar, author, and professor of African American Studies at Princeton University. She teaches and speaks about the relationship between innovation and inequity, knowledge and power, race and citizenship, health and justice. Her most recent book, Imagination, a Manifesto, traces the roots of our society to the imaginings of our ancestors. She writes that they imagined a particular type of society, and we are living into it. I find that kind of a disconcerting concept, but UUs actually have a hymn that professes that very idea. We are our grandmother's prayers. We are our grandfather's dreamings. We are the breath of our ancestors, it says, and so on. You know, it works both ways. We live out the dreams of our religious and social justice forebears, but also those who envision a hierarchical, white supremacist future, and perish the thought of the dystopian future that the tech bros have envisioned for us. But is that the only world that seems possible? Benjamin performs an experiment at the beginning of her talks. She divides her audience in half and asks one side to say, "Be bold," and the other side to say, "Get real." You want to try it? You guys want to say, "Be bold"? Be bold. Get real. Get real. Okay, I'm going to say these phrases and then you follow up. So, space travel. Be bold. Free public transportation. Colonize Mars. Be bold. Decolonize Earth. AI superintelligence. Cancel student debt. Build underground bunkers to survive the AI apocalypse. Build affordable housing. Spend billions of dollars on war. Stop genocide. Ceasefire now. You get the idea. Benjamin points out that we are trapped inside a national imagination that refuses us to allow to dream boldly about our society, and says that we must start to exercise our imagination muscle. She demonstrates the dichotomy of our imaginations by comparing two California propositions that were on the ballot in 2004. Proposition 71 was designed to create the California Institute for Regenerative Medicine and would allocate $3 billion for stem cell research over 10 years. It would also establish a California constitutional right to conduct stem cell research that would lead to the ability for someone who needed an organ transplant to be able to build their own, to grow their own cells of their own organ. And that way their body wouldn't reject it when they needed a transplant. Then there was Proposition 72 on the same ballot. It would require companies with 200 or more employees to provide 80% of the cost of all health care coverage for workers and their dependents within 2 years. Companies with 50 to 199 employees were to be given an additional year to put that insurance in place. Guess which one passed? We were unable to imagine, and we were able to imagine an exciting high-tech healthcare solution, but then didn't give the workers the means to afford it. We couldn't imagine healthcare for all. Ironic. Dr. Benjamin also talks about a NASA study that found that 98% of kindergartners are able to not only come up with new and different ways of thinking, but are able to do it at the genius level. In other words, almost every child has an innate ability to find creative ways to solve a puzzle. And while that's certainly wonderful, she reports that that capacity is systematically schooled out of us by the American educational system. A few students receive the privilege of engaging in gifted and talented programs, but our system grants that opportunity to only a few. The rest sit at desks, learning rote lessons, rarely exercising their inborn imaginative capabilities as their level of creativity plummets. Can we imagine giving all the children that opportunity? Benjamin believes that the most effective way to disrupt this country's deadly systems of violence, exploitation, and mass incarceration is exercising our imaginative possibilities collectively, our collective imagination. She asks us to push beyond the constraints of what we have been told is possible to think for ourselves. They tell us that a world without prisons is ridiculous. We've been told that schools that foster the genius of every child are impossible. They say believing in a society where everyone has food, shelter, and love is naive. But is it? Those things are somehow possible in other places on our planet. Do we have to accept the limitations that the people in power impose upon us? Or can we find a way to exercise our imaginations to create a better future? Here's what I think. I think all of this not only begs the question of whether our country can imagine a bright and exciting future, it makes me wonder about asking the same question at our own congregational level. And so I ask you, do you think if we allowed ourselves to be inspired by the White Queen, that our congregation, you and I, can imagine 6 impossible things that this congregation could do before breakfast? How about before lunch? Just imagine.